All right, hello. Um, I chose to study for my final project the young adolescent author John Green. I have always found him fascinating in that he writes these beautiful coming of age stories for young adolescents, but also makes these really interesting, fast paced, educational crash course videos on YouTube, which my students absolutely love. John Green has written several young adolescent books, and those include Looking for Alaska, which was published in 2005, An Abundance of Catherines, published in 2006, Paper Towns, published in 2008, The Fault in Our Stars, published in 2012, and Turtles All the Way Down, published in 2017. He also co-authored Will Grayson with David Levithon in 2010. I read The Fault in Our Stars when I was a freshman in college, and I read Turtles All the Way Down, An Abundance of Catherines, and Looking for Alaska over the past month to prepare for this author study. You would never know that Looking for Alaska was Green's first book. It was about a high schooler named Miles, who is later nicknamed Pudge, who attends a boarding school in Alabama. Here he meets lifelong friends, where in turn he discovers who he is and what the meaning of life is. And during this time, he suffers through a great tragedy, which causes him to learn a lot about himself and the world and what it means to be human. The characters were so real that you felt like you were right there with them, whether it be in the dorm room with Pudge and the Colonel, or at the smoking hole with Alaska. This book caused me to ponder some of the harder questions in life, and I think that young adolescents would most definitely benefit, as it's very realistic coming-of-age novel. An Abundance of Catherines is about Colin, a genius or prodigy, he can't quite be sure, who's been broken up with 19 times, or at least so he thought, with all Catherines, and those are Catherines starting with a K, by the way. And after breaking up with Catherine number 19, Colin goes on a road trip with his best friend Hassan, and on this road trip, he ends up in a small town where he's able to find work interviewing people. He meets a girl who, like himself, isn't quite sure of herself either, and he becomes obsessed with figuring out mathematically how and why he keeps getting dumped. And he's sure he'll be able to figure out a theorem for all relationships, of course, if he has the right variables. During his time hanging out with Lindsay, Hassan, and some of the other locals, he starts to realize that love can't be boiled down to a mathematical equation. This story was also a coming-of-age one, as Colin, Hassan, and Lindsay all learn things about themselves and who they want to be. But what I found really cool about the writing style in An Abundance of Catherines was Green's inclusion of footnotes. It's through these footnotes that we learn a lot about Colin and his past, and it's a fun little twist to the novel. Turtles All the Way Down is about a girl named Aza who struggles with severe anxiety and OCD. There's some mystery involved as a former friend of hers dad goes missing. There's also a love story intertwined, and the dynamics of friendship is explored. But all of these things are kind of set in the background as Aza comes to term with her mental health and what it means to overcome it. And while Turtles All the Way Down was different in its story setting than the other two, it still exhibited what John Green is most loved for by his readers, which is an extensive understanding of the young adolescent. He says this is because, one, he used to be an adolescent, and two, when he writes, he's attempting empathy, and he's just imagining what it's like to be that young adolescent. John Green has won several awards for his work. In 2006, he was the recipient of the Michael L. Prince Award, which annually honors the best book written for teens. In 2009, he won the Edgar Award, which is presented every year by the Mystery Writers of America. He's also been the finalist twice for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in the category of young adult fiction. In 2014, one of his books, The Fault in Our Stars, was adapted for the big screen, and again in 2015 with Paper Towns. But John Green doesn't just write young adolescent literature. He also spends his time video blogging with a community of people he calls nerd fighters. His YouTube channel for this is called Vlog Brothers, which he co-created with his brother Hank. They have raised millions of dollars to fight poverty and to preserve the earth. But the way I so vividly know John Green now is through his writing, but previously it was through his Crash Course educational YouTube channel. And as a social studies teacher, his videos have been vital in the classroom. But Green says he gets his inspiration for the stories that he writes from questions that both interest and or haunt him. For example, in Looking for Alaska, he thought about what the meaning is behind suffering and how one can exist in a world where suffering is so commonplace, which I think he explores and answers fairly well in Looking for Alaska. To conclude, John Green does amazing work with and for young adolescents. He presents stories in a way that will leave an impact on the reader, especially the young adult, as they're still coming to terms with who they are. Green has been credited by many as bringing a new era to adolescent fiction, one that's not focused on vampires and dystopia, but one that's focused on real, needed issues. And of course, with all authors, he has his critics as well, some of which say his books lack diversity. But overall, John Green's ability to produce authentic stories about life as a young adolescent is what makes him the great author that he is. So thanks for listening.